The plasma bolt hit Admiral Catherine Hayes square in the chest during the peace talks. She dropped without a sound, her eyes still open in shock. Beside her, General Marcus Webb tried to reach for his sidearm, but 3 more bolts turned him into ash before his fingers touched the grip. Colonel Patricia Dunn managed 1 step backward before the Zynthian assassins cut her down too. The Zynthian Emperor Krell stood from his throne, mandibles clicking in what passed for laughter among his species. His 4 eyes gleamed with satisfaction as he surveyed the carnage in his throne room. The human delegation lay dead or dying on his pristine white floors, their blood making dark pools that spread slowly across the marble. "Did you really think we wanted peace?" Krell's translator rendered his chittering voice into something cold and mechanical. "Humanity is a disease. You spread too fast, claim too many worlds. We invited you here to remove your leadership in one swift strike." The remaining human attachés were already being herded out by Zynthian guards, their hands bound, destined for prison ships. They would be ransomed back eventually, Krell thought, but without their generals, without their military minds, humanity would fracture. They would fight among themselves about who should lead, what strategy to pursue. By the time they organized a response, the Zynthian Empire would have claimed a dozen human colony worlds. It was a perfect plan. Ambassador Richard Cole was one of those attachés. He stumbled as the guard shoved him forward, his mind racing. He had watched 3 of the finest military minds in human space die in seconds. He had seen the trap spring shut, but what the Zynthians didn't know, what Krell couldn't possibly understand, was that humanity had contingencies. They always had contingencies. Deep in the Sol system, on a moon that officially didn't exist, a black facility received the encrypted distress signal. The security feeds from the throne room had been broadcasting the entire time hidden in Catherine Hayes' uniform insignia. The footage took 8 minutes to reach Earth at light speed. By the 9th minute, alarms were screaming through the corridors of Site Omega. Director Helen Park watched the executions 3 times before she allowed herself to feel anything. Then she felt everything at once: rage, grief, and a cold determination that settled into her bones like ice. She turned to her second-in-command. "Wake her up," Park said quietly. Commander Jack Rivera went pale. "Director, are you certain?" "The psychological evaluations? I don't care about the evaluations. We just lost our 3 best strategic minds to an ambush." "The Zynthians think they've won." Park's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Wake up, Lieutenant Colonel Casey Morgan. It's time to remind the galaxy why they used to fear that name." Rivera nodded slowly and moved to the communications panel. His fingers hesitated over the activation sequence. Everyone at Site Omega knew the story. Everyone knew what Casey Morgan had done during the Frontier Wars. The Zynthians had been there too, minor players in that conflict, but they had heard the stories. They called her Baba Yaga, the boogeyman, the witch who came in the night. Morgan had been humanity's most effective special operations commander until the incident on Proxima Station. Something had broken inside her during that mission. The official reports were classified so far above top secret that even most admirals couldn't access them. What everyone did know was that Morgan had requested to be put into cryosleep indefinitely. She didn't want to be human anymore, she had told the review board. She was too good at killing, and she was afraid of what she might become. They had granted her request. For 5 years, Casey Morgan had been frozen in a classified facility, a weapon in storage, waiting for the day when humanity needed her particular skills again. That day had arrived. In the cryobay, warning lights began to flash red. Automated systems pumped stimulants and warmth into the frozen body in Chamber 7. Ice crystals sublimated from pale skin. Vital signs spiked on monitors. And slowly, reluctantly, Casey Morgan's eyes opened. They were the coldest blue anyone at the facility had ever seen. Eyes that had watched cities burn. Eyes that had calculated the deaths of thousands with the same ease most people solved simple math problems. Eyes that belonged to a killer who had forgotten how to be anything else. "Welcome back, Colonel," Director Park said through the intercom. "We need Baba Yaga one more time." Casey Morgan sat up slowly, the cryogel sliding off her skin. She looked at her hands, flexing fingers that hadn't moved in 5 years. Then she looked up at the camera and smiled. It wasn't a happy expression. It was the smile of a predator that had just caught a familiar scent. "Who do you need me to kill?" Her voice was rough from disuse but steady. "Everyone responsible," Park replied, "starting with a Xinthian emperor." Morgan's smile widened. "Give me a ship and a team. I'll handle the rest." The Xinthians had made a critical error in their calculations. They had studied human military doctrine, analyzed human fleet movements, predicted human political responses. But they had never bothered to learn human folklore. They didn't know the stories that human children whispered in the dark. They didn't know about the monsters that humans created when pushed too far. They were about to learn. Across human space, encrypted messages went out to very specific individuals, men and women who had served with Morgan during the Frontier Wars, people who had seen what she could do and had chosen to follow her anyway. Most of them had retired, trying to forget the things they had done. All of them answered the call. Within 48 hours, a ship departed from Site Omega. It had no official designation, no transponder code, no formal commission. On paper, it didn't exist. Inside its hull, 12 of the most dangerous humans ever created were preparing for war. Casey Morgan stood on the bridge studying the star charts. The Xinthian Empire sprawled across 200 systems. It would take a conventional fleet months to mount an invasion. She planned to bring it to its knees in 3 weeks. "Course laid in, Colonel," her pilot reported. Former Lieutenant Sarah Kim had flown insertion missions during the worst years of the Frontier Wars. If anyone could get them past Xinthian defenses, it was her. "Execute," Morgan ordered. The ship jumped to faster-than-light speeds, leaving Sol system behind. Ahead lay the Xinthian border, heavily fortified and considered impenetrable by conventional military analysis. But Casey Morgan had never been conventional. Emperor Krell was celebrating his victory when the reports started coming in. The first were confusing. A listening post on the border had gone silent. That happens sometimes. Equipment failed, crews got lazy, he dismissed it. Then a patrol fleet missed its scheduled check-in. Then another outpost went dark. Then an entire mining colony stopped broadcasting. Krell summoned his military advisors, his 4 eyes narrowing in suspicion. Didn't know where to send the gift. "What is happening at our border?" The reports his advisors brought made no sense. No massive fleet had been detected. No declaration of war had been received. Just silence spreading through the outer systems like a disease. "Send a battle group to investigate," Krell ordered. The battle group never reported back. In the Xinthian Military Command Center, analysts pored over what little data they had. Ships were disappearing. Installations were being destroyed. But there was no enemy fleet, no invasion force. Just shadows and death. One analyst, younger than the others, pulled up historical files from the Frontier Wars. She had been researching human military tactics, trying to understand how they fought. What she found made her mandibles clench in fear. "Sir," she called to her superior, "I think I know what we're dealing with." She pulled up a file marked with a human skull symbol. The translation of the human words beneath it read, "Special Operations Division, Baba Yaga Protocol." The superior officer read the file, his compound eyes widening with each line. When he finished, he looked at his subordinate. "This can't be real. These numbers, these tactics. One small team could not possibly—" An alarm cut him off. Another outpost had gone silent. This one was only 3 systems from the imperial capital. Baba Yaga was coming, and she was bringing hell with her. Part 2, the Xinthian fortress on Caldrus Prime was considered impregnable. 30,000 troops, orbital defense platforms, shield generators that could withstand a sustained bombardment from an entire fleet. It protected the main supply route to the imperial core worlds. Without it, the Xinthian military would lose its ability to project force across half the empire. Casey Morgan studied the fortress from orbit, her eyes tracking patrol patterns and shield fluctuations. Beside her, Lieutenant Danny Foster worked through the technical specifications they had stolen from a Xinthian database 2 days earlier. The shields have a 0.3-second gap every time they refresh the power cycle, Danny reported. He had been a demolitions expert before retiring. Now he was calculating exactly where to place charges for maximum structural damage. But we'd need to be inside to exploit it. Then we go inside, Morgan said simply. Her team didn't question the statement. They had all seen her do the impossible before, what normal people called suicide missions. Casey Morgan called Tuesday. The insertion was textbook perfect. Sarah Kim brought their ship in on a debris trajectory masked by the wreckage of a cargo hauler that had been destroyed weeks earlier. They drifted past 3 layers of sensors before releasing a boarding pod that looked like nothing more than another chunk of shrapnel. The pod attached to the fortress's waste disposal port, not glamorous, but unmonitored. Sergeant Luis Mendez cut through the hull plating with a plasma torch while the rest of the team checked their weapons. Morgan carried 2 pistols, a combat knife, and enough concealed explosives to level a city block. Light loadout by her standards. They moved through the fortress like ghosts. Morgan's tactical awareness was legendary. She could predict enemy patrol routes by the sound of their footsteps, identify weak points in security by the placement of cameras. It was like she could see the future, but it was really just pattern recognition refined to an art form. Guards 200 meters ahead, she whispered. 4 of them. Shift change in 90 seconds. The team waited in the shadows of a storage room. When the new guards arrived and the old ones departed, there was a brief moment when 8 Xinthians stood together, talking. Morgan's hand signals were precise. 4 team members moved simultaneously, silenced weapons dropping all 8 aliens before any could raise an alarm. They took the guards' uniforms and access cards. It wouldn't pass close inspection, but it might buy them seconds when seconds mattered. The fortress's command center was buried deep in the asteroid it had been carved from. Getting there required passing through multiple checkpoints, each more secure than the last. Morgan's team split up, each taking a different route, planning to converge at the objective simultaneously. Morgan herself went through the main corridors, walking like she owned the place. Confidence was the best disguise. 3 times she passed Xinthian soldiers. 3 times they nodded respectfully at her uniform, not bothering to look at the face beneath the helmet. She reached the command center first. The door was sealed, requiring both biometric scanning and a 20-digit code. Morgan pulled out a device that Danny had built based on stolen Xinthian technology. It cycled through possible combinations while simultaneously spoofing fingerprint data from the access card she had taken. 30 seconds. The door clicked open. Inside, 17 Xinthian officers turned to look at her. Morgan's hands were already moving, pulling both pistols from their holsters. The first 3 shots took down the officers closest to the alarm panels. The next 5 targeted communications officers. By the time the remaining Xinthians realized what was happening, half their number were dead. The rest died quickly. Morgan moved to the main control console, her fingers dancing across alien interfaces. She had studied Xinthian systems for years during the Frontier Wars. The language was different, but the logic was similar. Defense systems, power grids, shield generators, all controlled from this room. She downloaded everything to a data chip, then started planting Danny's special gifts throughout the command center. Small devices that would turn the fortress's own power systems into bombs. Her comm unit chirped. "In position," came Danny's voice. The rest of the team had reached their objectives. Reactor room, shield generator, main armory. 30 seconds, Morgan replied. She placed the last charge and walked calmly toward the exit. Behind her, the bodies of 17 Xinthian officers lay where they had fallen. In 30 seconds, this fortress would tear itself apart from the inside. 25 seconds. She was in the corridor, moving at a brisk walk. Running would attract attention. 20 seconds. A patrol passed her. She nodded. They nodded back. 15 seconds. She reached the rendezvous point where Sarah had positioned their ship at a docking port they had quietly seized an hour earlier. 10 seconds. The team was loading onto the ship, moving with practiced efficiency. 5 seconds. The airlock sealed. 0. The fortress shuddered. Then it screamed, metal tearing, explosions cascading through the structure as reactor containment failed and ammunition stores detonated. The shield generators overloaded, creating a feedback loop that fried every electrical system in the complex. Sarah punched the engines, rocketing them away from the dying fortress. Behind them, 30,000 Xinthian soldiers were scrambling for escape pods, abandoning their posts. The fortress wouldn't explode completely, Morgan had calculated that, but it would be offline for months, maybe years. The supply route was cut. Emperor Krell received the news an hour later. His mandibles ground together in rage as his advisors showed him the footage. One small team, 12 humans. They had gutted the fortress in under 2 hours. How? He demanded. How did they penetrate our defenses? His intelligence chief pulled up files trying to explain, but the truth was, they didn't know. Morgan's team had moved too fast, left too little evidence. It was like fighting shadows. Find them, Krell ordered. I want every ship we have searching for these terrorists. I want them caught and executed publicly. But finding Casey Morgan was easier said than done. She had learned her tactics during years of asymmetric warfare. She knew how to hide, how to move through hostile territory, how to strike and disappear before anyone knew she had been there. The Xinthians called in favors from allied species. They put bounties on human heads. They locked down their borders and instituted martial law across their territory. It didn't help. 3 days after the fortress fell, a Xinthian shipyard exploded. 2 days after that, a military academy was infiltrated and its entire database was wiped, along with the instructors who knew the curriculum. Then a communications hub went dark, cutting off 7 systems from the Imperial network. Morgan was dismantling the Xinthian military piece by piece, and they couldn't stop her because they couldn't find her. In the Imperial Palace, Krell's advisors were beginning to panic. Some suggested suing for peace, returning the human prisoners, offering reparations. Others argued for escalation, for striking at human civilian targets to force Morgan out into the open. Krell rejected both options. He was the emperor of a vast civilization. He would not be brought low by a single human and her team of killers. Double the guards at all critical facilities, he ordered. Institute random security checks. I want biometric scans on everyone entering sensitive areas. She cannot hide forever. But Morgan wasn't trying to hide. She was hunting. Her next target was the Imperial Intelligence Headquarters on Xinthis IV. The building was a fortress in its own right, housing the Empire's spy networks, interrogation facilities, and the location of every human prisoner taken during the ambush. Ambassador Richard Cole was being held there along with the other survivors from the peace delegation. They had been interrogated extensively, though the Xinthians had been careful not to kill them. Dead prisoners had no ransom value. Cole sat in his cell trying to maintain hope. He had no idea what was happening in the wider galaxy. For all he knew, Earth had sued for peace, accepting the loss of their generals as the price of avoiding war. Then the lights went out. Emergency systems kicked in after a moment, bathing everything in red. Alarms began to wail. Cole heard gunfire in the distance, then closer. Screams, explosions. His cell door blew inward. The lock fused to slag by a plasma cutter. A figure in black tactical gear stepped through the smoke. Ambassador Cole? The voice was female, calm despite the chaos. Yes. Casey Morgan. I'm here to take you home. Cole had heard the name before. Everyone in military circles knew about Baba Yaga. He stared at the woman who had become a legend, trying to reconcile the stories with the person in front of him. She looked normal, tired, maybe. But her eyes were wrong. They looked through him, calculating threats and angles like he was just another piece of terrain. Can you walk? Morgan asked. I think so. Then stay close and do exactly what I tell you. They moved through corridors filled with smoke and bodies. Morgan's team had hit the building from 3 directions simultaneously, overwhelming the guards through sheer speed and violence. They weren't trying to occupy the building, just extract the prisoners and destroy as much intelligence data as possible. Cole saw another team member dragging 2 wounded human attaches. Someone else was carrying hard drives torn from server racks. The entire operation was controlled chaos, every person knowing their role and executing it perfectly. They reached the extraction point where Sarah had landed their ship on the building's roof. Xinthian reinforcements were arriving, firing from nearby buildings. Morgan's team returned fire while loading the prisoners and stolen data. "Everyone's on board," Danny reported. Morgan was the last one up the ramp. She turned and looked back at the burning intelligence headquarters, at the Xinthian soldiers scrambling to organize a response. Then she pulled a remote detonator from her pocket and pressed the button. The building's basement erupted in flames. The charges Danny had placed in the power distribution network turned the entire structure into a fireball. Decades of intelligence work, countless secrets, all going up in smoke. Morgan smiled her cold smile and walked into the ship. As they jumped to faster-than-light speeds, Ambassador Cole sat in the med bay, being treated for minor injuries. He watched Morgan through the doorway as she debriefed her team. She was methodical, noting what worked and what could be improved, already planning the next mission. "Is she human?" Cole asked the medic quietly. The medic, a former combat surgeon named Linda Wright, followed his gaze. "Barely," she said. "Morgan gave up most of her humanity years ago, traded it for the ability to do what needed to be done. The question isn't whether she's human. It's whether we want her to be." Cole thought about that as the ship carried them toward safety. The Xinthians had killed 3 generals, thinking it would cripple humanity's ability to wage war. Instead, they had awakened something far worse than any general. They had awakened the monster humanity kept locked away for emergencies. And that monster was just getting started. Part 3. The Xinthian High Command gathered in an emergency session, their chamber thick with the pheromones of fear and anger. Fleet Admiral Zek stood before the strategic display, watching red markers spread across the holographic map like a disease. Each marker represented a facility that had been destroyed or compromised in the past 2 weeks. "This is unsustainable," declared Counselor Vren, her mandibles clicking nervously. "We have lost more strategic assets to this one human team than we did in the entire frontier wars. Our military readiness has dropped 40%. Our supply chains are disrupted. Our troops are demoralized." Emperor Krell remained silent, his 4 eyes fixed on the spreading red markers. He had underestimated humanity, he realized, not their fleets or their technology, but their willingness to unleash something like Casey Morgan on the galaxy. "What do we know about her?" he finally asked. Intelligence Director Mock pulled up a file that had been compiled from fragmentary data. Lieutenant Colonel Casey Morgan, Human Special Forces, responsible for over 300 confirmed missions during the Frontier Wars. The humans called her Baba Yaga, after an old myth from their homeworld. A witch who lived in a house that walked on chicken legs, who ate the unwary, who could not be escaped. "Superstition," Krell scoffed. "Perhaps," Mog conceded, but Morgan's psychological profile suggests she may believe it herself. She requested indefinite cryosleep after the Proxima Station incident. The details are classified even by human standards, but our sources indicate she killed over 2,000 enemy combatants in 72 hours during a hostage rescue operation. The chamber fell silent. 2,000 kills in 3 days, accomplished by one person. The numbers should have been impossible. "She is not working alone," Fleet Admiral Zek interjected. "She has a team. 12 humans, all with similar operational backgrounds. We need to find their base of operations, their support network. Cut her off from supplies and intelligence." "We have tried," Mock said wearily. "She never stays in one place. She never uses the same ship twice. She steals resources from our own facilities. It is as if she is living off our empire like a parasite." Counselor Vren leaned forward. "Then we must make a deal. Contact the human government. Surely they do not approve of these terrorist actions. If we return the prisoners unconditionally and offer reparations, no." Krell's voice was sharp enough to silence the chamber. "We do not negotiate with terrorists. We do not show weakness." "Then what do you propose?" Vren challenged. Krell's mandibles spread in what might have been a smile. "We set a trap. Morgan has been reactive, hitting our facilities in response to strategic needs. We make her proactive. We give her a target too tempting to ignore." He gestured to the holographic display. A new marker appeared, showing a prison facility deep in Xinthian territory. "Our interrogation center on Helix 9, Krell explained. "We announced publicly that we are moving the human prisoners there for enhanced questioning. We leak the security details, make it look like an easy target. When Morgan comes, we will be waiting with every soldier we can spare." Admiral Zek studied the plan, his tactical mind working through the variables. It could work, but Morgan is not foolish. She will suspect a trap. Of course she will, Krell agreed. But she will come anyway, because that is what humans do. They cannot resist trying to save their own, even when it costs them everything. The plan was set in motion within hours. Across Xinthian media networks, reports spread about the transfer of human prisoners to a maximum security facility. The leaked security protocols made it seem vulnerable, understaffed at key positions. Any competent analyst would see it as an opportunity. Meanwhile, Krell assembled the largest military force he could without destabilizing other fronts. 10,000 elite troops, atmospheric gunships, orbital support vessels. He personally selected the commanding officer, General Thex, who had distinguished himself during border conflicts. "You will have every advantage," Krell told Thex. "Sensors, firepower, numbers. When Morgan arrives, you will capture her alive if possible. I want her paraded through the streets of the capital before her execution." General Thex saluted with all four arms. "It will be done, Majesty." On a small ship drifting through an asteroid field, Casey Morgan reviewed the intelligence reports with her team. The leaked information about Helix 9 had been obvious, too obvious. She had expected the Xinthians to try something like this eventually. "It's a trap," Danny said, stating the obvious. "They want us to hit the prison, probably have it surrounded with enough firepower to flatten a city." "Agreed," Morgan said calmly. "So we don't hit the prison." The team looked at her, waiting for the explanation. "They expect us to rescue the prisoners directly," Morgan continued. "So we don't. We go after something they need more than a prison. Something that will force them to move their assets away from the trap." She pulled up a different target on the tactical display, the Imperial Palace. The team went silent. Sarah Kim spoke first.
"Casey, that's suicide."
"The capital has defensive systems that make everything else look like a border patrol station. We'd never get close." "We would if they thought we were somewhere else," Morgan replied. "We let them think we're going for the prison. Send a decoy team to Helix 9, make them commit their forces there. While they're busy springing their trap on nobody, we hit the palace and force Krell to negotiate." Luis Mendez rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "You want to take the Emperor hostage? I want to make him understand that killing our generals was a mistake," Morgan corrected. "Whether he lives or dies afterward depends on how reasonable he's willing to be." Danny started running calculations on his datapad. "We'd need a way past the orbital defenses, and the palace shield generators are redundant systems. Even if we took out the primary, the backups would engage before we could penetrate. Unless we were already inside when the shields went down," Morgan said. "The palace has a state dinner scheduled for the same night they expect us to hit the prison. Diplomatic delegations from a dozen species, security will be tight, but they'll be focused on external threats, not guests who are already vetted." "And how do we get vetted?" Sarah asked. Morgan smiled. "We make them invite us." Over the next 3 days, Morgan's team executed one of the most elaborate cons in military history. They hacked into the Xinthian diplomatic database and created credentials for a minor species called the Pelthians, who had recently signed a trade agreement with the Empire. The real Pelthian delegation was delayed through carefully orchestrated mechanical failures to their transport ships. Meanwhile, Morgan and her team underwent cosmetic alterations. Prosthetics to change facial structure, contact lenses to alter eye color, voice modulators to change speech patterns. They studied Pelthian culture, mannerisms, language. By the time they arrived at the capital in a stolen Pelthian vessel, they were convincing enough to pass the initial security screenings. The Xinthians were distracted, most of their intelligence resources focused on monitoring approaches to Helix 9. The state dinner was held in the Grand Hall of the Imperial Palace, a massive chamber with vaulted ceilings and enough gold ornamentation to buy a small fleet. Hundreds of dignitaries mingled, making deals and alliances, while servants circulated with exotic foods. Emperor Krell held court from a raised platform, accepting tributes and hearing petitions. He was in good spirits, confident that within hours the human terrorist would walk into his trap and her reign of terror would end. Morgan watched him from across the hall, wearing the elaborate robes of a Pelthian trade minister. Her team was scattered throughout the room, each in position. They had smuggled in weapons piece by piece, hidden in diplomatic gifts and food containers. Nothing that would trigger sensors, but enough to do what needed to be done. She touched her comm unit, a device disguised as jewelry. Status? Danny's voice came back. Charges placed on primary shield generator. Backup power systems wired to overload. Ready on your signal. Sarah checked in next. Our ship is in position. Can extract from the roof in 90 seconds when you give the word. Luis and the others confirmed their positions. Everything was set. Morgan walked calmly through the crowd, making small talk in flawless Pelthian. She accepted a drink from a servant, toasted with a Zynthian admiral who had no idea he was talking to the galaxy's most wanted human. She was 10 meters from the Emperor when the reports started coming in. A junior officer rushed to Krell's side, whispering urgently. The Emperor's expression changed from contentment to confusion to rage. Morgan could read the body language even from a distance. The decoy team had just hit Helix 9. Thousands of soldiers were engaging what they thought was Morgan's main force. Krell was standing, giving orders, pulling military assets away from the capital to support the operation at the prison. The trap was springing, just not the way he intended. Morgan set down her drink and walked toward the platform. Security guards moved to intercept, but she had diplomatic credentials that checked out. They let her pass. She climbed the steps to stand before the Emperor. Krell barely glanced at her, too focused on the tactical reports streaming in. Majesty, she said in perfect Pelthian, I bring a message from my people. Later, Krell dismissed her with a wave. Morgan's hand moved to the small of her back where a ceramic knife had been hidden. I insist. In one smooth motion, she dropped the Pelthian accent and spoke in clear English. Hello, Krell, remember me? The Emperor's 4 eyes widened in recognition. He opened his mouth to shout for guards, but Morgan's knife was already at his throat. One word and you die, she said quietly. Your guards shoot, you die. You cooperate, you might live. Choose now. Around the hall, her team had drawn their own concealed weapons, targeting key guards and military officers. The other diplomats began to realize something was wrong, backing away in panic. How? Krell managed, his voice barely a whisper. You were so focused on your trap that you forgot to watch your own house, Morgan replied. Now here's what's going to happen. You're going to order your forces to stand down. You're going to release every human prisoner in your empire. You're going to compensate the families of the generals you murdered. And you're going to formally apologize to Earth. Never, Krell hissed. Morgan pressed the knife harder, drawing a thin line of green blood. Then you'll die knowing your empire is about to get a lot smaller. My friends in the basement are currently rigging your palace to explode. The shield generators are compromised. Your orbital defenses have been hacked. I have enough firepower pointed at this building to turn it into a crater, so ask yourself, is your pride worth your life? The standoff lasted exactly 15 seconds before Danny's voice came through the comm. Zynthian fleet just jumped into orbit. Looks like they figured out the decoy. We're going to have company soon. Morgan kept her eyes on Krell. Hear that? Your window for surrender just got smaller. Make a choice. The Emperor's mandibles ground together in impotent rage. He was the ruler of billions, commander of vast fleets. But right now, he was one being with a knife at his throat, facing an enemy who had nothing left to lose. What guarantee do I have that you will honor any agreement? He asked. None, Morgan admitted. But you have my word that if you don't agree, the last thing you'll see is this ceiling coming down on top of you. Krell looked into her cold blue eyes and saw the truth there. This human would absolutely kill him and die in the process without hesitation. She had already given up her humanity. Death held no fear for someone like that. "Very well," he said finally. "I agree to your terms." Part 4. General Thex stood amid the ruins of his perfect trap, watching emergency crews pull bodies from collapsed sections of the Helix 9 prison facility. The decoy team had led his forces on a chase through the complex before detonating enough explosives to bring down 3 entire wings. His casualties were minimal, but his pride was shattered. "Sir, urgent communication from the capital," his aide reported. Thex activated the channel expecting a commendation for capturing at least some of the terrorists. Instead, Emperor Krell's face filled the screen, and the general felt his blood freeze at the expression he saw there. "General, you will immediately cease all operations and withdraw your forces to defensive positions," Krell said, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "All human prisoners are to be released unharmed. This war is over." "Majesty, I don't understand. Morgan is in my throne room with a knife at my throat," Krell interrupted. "You have 30 minutes to comply with her demands or she will kill me and destroy the palace. Is that clear enough?" The channel went dead. Thex stared at the blank screen, his mind struggling to process what he had just heard. While he had been chasing ghosts at the prison, Baba Yaga had infiltrated the most secure building in the Empire and taken the Emperor hostage. It was brilliant and terrifying in equal measure. He gave the orders immediately. Around him, his troops began standing down, confused but disciplined. In holding cells throughout the facility, human prisoners were being released, given emergency supplies, and directed toward evacuation shuttles. Back at the palace, Morgan held her position while chaos erupted around her. Krell had ordered his guards to stand down, but that didn't mean they were happy about it. Rifles remained trained on her from a dozen angles. One wrong move, and she would be atomized, Emperor or no Emperor. "The fleet is withdrawing," Sarah reported from her position near the entrance. "Orbital defenses going passive. Looks like he's actually complying." "He doesn't have much choice," Morgan replied. "Danny, status on our insurance policy?" "Charges are live and linked to a dead man's switch," Danny confirmed. "If your heart stops beating, this palace becomes a memory." Krell's mandibles clicked in frustration. "You have what you want. The prisoners will be released. Reparations will be paid. Now let me go." "Not yet," Morgan said. "First, we're going to have a conversation about consequences." She shifted her grip on the knife, making Krell wince. Around the hall, diplomats from other species watched in horrified fascination. This would be the story of the century, the day a single human held the Zynthian Empire hostage. "You killed 3 of our best generals thinking it would cripple humanity," Morgan continued. "You thought we would fragment, fight among ourselves, become easy prey. That shows a fundamental misunderstanding of what humans are." "Enlighten me," Krell said bitterly. "We are a species that evolved from pack hunters," Morgan explained. "We learned to work together, to coordinate, to be stronger as a group than as individuals. But we also learn